wrapping up now, I think. So we're going to give it just a couple more minutes to give time for people to, stand up, stretch their legs a bit, and then come join us. So we'll start in a couple more minutes here.
Come out of some of these sessions. I just want to thank everyone for taking seats at the table. I mean, this last few days have been amazing, and I've watched many of you just, share your expertise, your experiences, and be vulnerable and take risk. And last night at the end of the session, the last session of the night, I was, just felt really full with excitement, joy, great gratitude, and I am really excited about today's session to hear from our alums. And I'm just thankful for our student leaders, activists, advocates, allies, accomplices, and I honestly, today as a Friday, kind of coming sort of to the end of our week, we've got 2 more packed days of great stuff, but just want to thank you all for taking seats at the table, because there's a lot of scholarship that's been taking place over the last few days and a lot of support, so thank you all.
So I think we'll get started now, folks. I want to first just welcome everyone and echo Felicia's, remarks, really everything she said. And thank you all in particular for joining us on a Friday afternoon, a snowy Friday afternoon, to, take the time to learn more about and reflect on the lessons and the legacy of the 1969-70 Black student protests at Springfield College. For those of you that don't know me, I see a lot of familiar faces, but a lot of unfamiliar names and faces too. My name is Delahanty. I'm an assistant professor of history here at Springfield. And in just a minute, I'm going to be introducing our other panelists, and they'll introduce themselves to you in a bit more detail too. I want to first just kind of describe our plan for the session. Each of us is going to deliver a pretty brief paper, just sharing some of our main insights into the events on campus that unfolded in these 2 years. And we want to stress at the outset that we'll really only get to scratch the surface of a lot of what happened. We hope that if this is the first time you're learning about the flurry of student activism that took place on campus some 50 years ago, that it won't be the last. And after we finish our presentations, I'll be sending out some links in the chat to collections within the Springfield College archives and special collections, where you can learn more about these events and see and get to read through some of the historical records and documents that we've been studying and learning from. And here I would be remiss if I didn't thank our college archivist, Jeff Monso, who has really done maybe more than anyone else I can think of to make this research possible, to digitize these materials and to just do the work that's necessary for us to be able to learn about this. So Jeff, thank you. I also want to thank a couple of other groups that made the session possible. The first is the Men of Excellence Club, many of whose members I know are with us today, and Kris's leadership in particular with that group, who have supported this session's efforts to raise awareness and to reflect back on the 1969 and 70 Black student protests. And I also want to welcome members of the Legacy alumni of color groups, some of whom are with us today, and who are really fortunate to have their presence and perhaps be able to get to hear from them later on today as well. That's for me as an historian who usually studies the 1800s. I don't get to talk and see the people that I study, right? And so it's really fascinating and really important that we get to have them with us today, and that they've been really helpful working with Kris, especially to let us learn about these events. So I'm going to ask my fellow panelists now to introduce themselves. All of these are students who have done really extensive research in our collections, who have spoken with alumni who were involved in or witnesses to these events. And so I'll start with Kris and ask Kris, Quinn, and Aniley to introduce yourselves, if you wouldn't mind.
Hey everybody, I'm Kris. I'm a senior and president of MOE, and excited to talk today. You can go, Quinn.
All right, my name's Quinn. I'm a senior in the history and secondary education major at this college, and I got interested and started really learning about this topic. It was fall last year in my making history public class, when we really got to work hands-on with the materials and get to interview people involved, which was super cool.
Hi, I'm Aniley Morales. I'm a senior history major, and I, as Quinn, took the 201 Making History Public, where we really delve into this. I'm also currently working on an internship where we're looking to expand upon this kind of information and make it a little bit more accessible to the people of Springfield as well.
Thanks, Kris, Quinn, and Aniley. And so each of them will examine kind of a particular part of the student protests and the response and reactions to them on campus. What I want to do to start our session is kind of situate these events in a national historic context and provide some analysis of some of the causes and the outcomes of the protests. And I first think it's important that we just all understand what we all mean when, in the title of our session and when we refer to it today, when we talk about Springfield College Black student protests and sort of related instances of student activism in 1969 and 1970. So I'm going to share my screen with you folks and give some rough timeline here. It looks like a ton, but believe me, I did my best to kind of cull down as much extraneous information as I could. You'll get access a little bit later on to a much more detailed and thorough timeline of what took place over these 2 years. But this kind of briefly summarizes some of the major instances of protest, of the administration's response and kind of, counter protests. And it's important to stress that all of these, the vast majority of this was conceived of, organized by, and carried out by African-American students on campus here. They also had a number of white allies on campus who followed their lead along the way, one of whom, Larry Lebo, will be the focus of a lot of Quinn's talk. And to try to cover all aspects of the background to and the details of the events that I've tried to map out in this timeline would take much more than the rest of our session. Rather than doing that, what I'll do is kind of contextualize them and then speak briefly to their kind of legacy. And it's important to stress that these events were by no means unique to Springfield College. Indeed, Springfield College was just one of scores of colleges and universities across the country where the Black campus movement reached its peak in 1969 and 1970. From the movement's epicenter at San Francisco State University in the top left-hand corner there out on the West Coast, to Harvard University in the bottom right-hand corner on the East Coast, from HBCUs like Howard University in Washington, D.C., to historically white colleges and universities, like the University of Wisconsin at Madison. These 2 years in all of these places and many more witnessed Black student activists organizing, making demands of college administrators and faculty, and taking what they described as quote unquote positive action if and when their demands were not met. So what does this look like at Springfield? In some ways, I think this is the start of it, right? At least the first, the first sort of catalyst of the protests that would follow. On February 19th, 1969, a group of students calling themselves the Central Committee of Black Students submitted to Springfield College's president, Wilbert Laughlin, this list of 9 demands. Not this particular list, this is a copy, and the writing in red is actually notes from a faculty member, an unidentified faculty member, who was learning about this in a faculty meeting and kind of taking his own notes about them. Both the demands themselves, and you might be able to kind of read some of them here. There's 9 of them in total, each of them having kind of some, A, B, C, D, et cetera, with some elaboration. Each of these demands, as well as the timing and the circumstances behind them, really coincided directly with broader developments in the Black campus movement nationally. So demands like, admitting more Black students, the hiring of more Black faculty and an African-American staffer in the admissions office, the creation of a Black cultural center on campus, or the demand for the creation of a Black studies program. All of these echoed similar demands that were being made at the same time by Black student unions across the country. Now, additionally, the Central Committee's decision, the group that put this petition forward was the Central Committee of Black Students, and their decision to present these demands in February 1969 was no coincidence. Ibram Kendi, who's the historian who has written kind of the definitive account of the Black campus movement, he identifies February 1969 as what he calls the quote unquote pinnacle of the movement. February 21st of that year was the 4-year anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X. And a lot of the student activists, both at Springfield and across the country, really sort of saw their goals and tactics as aligning with those of the fallen proponent of Black pride and self-determination. So for instance, on that date, on February 21st, here at Springfield College, a sophomore named Lionel Jardine issued this memorandum, I should say, to the local media to publicize what was happening on campus, which was a teach-in at Woods Hall that the students called the Malcolm X Liberation School. And you can see the arrow pointing to that statement about halfway through the document here. And that phrase, the Malcolm X Liberation School, was being used at dozens of other colleges across the country for similar sort of aims and purposes. And there's additional evidence in the archives, in our archival collections, that really sheds light on the national and in some ways the global context in which these protests unfolded. In May 1969, a student named James Russell III, who was one of the main organizers of Black students on campus, he delivered a statement to the Board of Trustees amid ongoing efforts by student activists to get the administration to meet their original 9 demands. And I've pulled out just a kind of brief snippet from this May 23rd statement from Russell here that includes these telling lines in which he links Black students' efforts to the labors of civil rights activists in Mississippi, to protests against communism in Hungary, and to decolonization campaigns in Africa. And the closing sentence here, where he says, he calls to quote unquote, construct an American reality defined by Afro-Americans. That kind of really neatly encapsulates a core tenet of Black Power thought from the late 1960s. And so the key point here is that, you know, in a lot of ways, Springfield College wasn't unique in terms of the nature and the timing of Black student activism that would unfold on the campus over the next year. However, and it's really important to stress this, student activists like Lionel Jardine or the members of the Central Committee of Black Students, they were responding to particular instances of racism and to specific types of inequity that they were experiencing at Springfield College. One of the most notable of these that comes through in the records that we've been looking at came in March 1968, when there was an attempted cross-burning on campus that was only foiled when a 10-foot tall cross soaked in lighter fluid was discovered behind a campus building before it could be set ablaze. And while President Laughlin denounced this attempt as quote unquote prejudicial and malicious, I've seen no evidence of a serious investigation and certainly no evidence of any sort of, you know, attempt to discipline or prosecute someone for this act. More immediate causes of the initial set of demands coming in February 1969 seem to have stemmed from a Black Arts Festival that was being held on campus in that month. And the festival was conceived of and really organized in large part by the aforementioned James Russell III. He was the leader of a student club, the Afro-American Society, that was organizing the event. And basically the idea was to bring together artists, musicians. They even brought to campus a well-known comedian at the time named Dick Gregory, in sort of a celebration of Black accomplishments in the arts. However, this event was marred first in January when signs advertising the festival on campus were found kind of torn down and strewn about campus. And then in early February, in the days leading up to the festival itself, there were these sort of baseless and really unfounded rumors that the Black Arts Festival was a cover for, quote, a Black anarchist riot, end quote, that was supposedly going to happen on campus. And this led a number of white students, many white students, it seems, to leave campus on the weekend of the festival itself. So it was in this context, that Black student activists at the college submitted their demands to President Laughlin on February 19th. And the administration's refusal to meet some of the demands and its slowness in meeting others prompted a takeover of the administration building 2 months later in April by a couple of dozen African-American student activists. Over the next year, many of those same and additionally more Black student activists would stage 2 more building takeovers, most notably in Massasoit Hall in March 1970, and sympathetic white student activists would stage another takeover of the administration building in April 1970, and also wage a days-long hunger strike in that same month. And we'll learn a little bit more about what unfolded over this year of protest and activism on campus from the other talks. But to conclude my remarks, I want to kind of flash forward a bit to the summer of 1970 and touch briefly on some of the outcomes and legacies of these protests. Some of us might remember that a few weeks ago, we received an email from President Cooper noting a number of demands that had been made by Black student activists on campus today, one of which was to honor the student protesters of 1969 and 70. And I want to renew that sentiment here and provide some additional context for where that demand comes from. April 1970, excuse me, this is a couple of photographs from the administration building takeover in May 1969 that I meant to slide to earlier. But in April 1970, 49 African-American students who took part in a takeover of Massasoit Hall the previous month received disciplinary notices for their involvement in the protest. The document on the left-hand side here notes who these students were, at least some of them. It's a partial list, and it notes the degrees of discipline that they were accorded. 30 students were placed on probation, but 19 students were suspended, or as was the phrasing, quote unquote, separated from the college. Those 19 suspended students had taken part in the administration building takeover, the photographs we just saw in the previous slide. Those 19 suspended students were part of that protest in the previous year. And so their suspension was justified by administrators on the grounds that they had already jeopardized their standing at the college by taking part in that demonstration. Now, only a few months after the suspension of these 19 students, there was a task force that was assembled to sort of discuss those students' fate. Would they be invited to rejoin the college? Would they be would the suspensions be upheld? And that task force was part of a larger study that the college conducted in the summer of 1970, the sort of event they called the Collegium, which was really sort of a big sort of self-study of the institution that had been called for by faculty that thought that the student protests brought some really pressing matters to light that the college needed to resolve. And as part of the final Collegium's report, this particular task force recommended to President Laughlin that the 19 suspended Black students be invited to rejoin the college, and that they help lead a college-wide semester-long workshop intended to improve Black-white relations on campus. And the basis of that recommendation, that they be invited to rejoin the college and not serve their suspension, is, I think, found in this excerpt from their recommendation. You might, if you read the text, what you'll find is that they're pointing out first what they describe as a quote unquote, as a quote, moral issue of institutional racism, end quote, that they argue produced Massasoit Hall takeover in the first place. Second, and I think really importantly, this task force highlighted, quote, substantial legal issues, end quote, that, quote, raised to question whether there was legality in the judicial due process in the suspended students' cases. In other words, they're saying, we don't think these suspended students were given fair due process in the disciplinary proceedings against them. But Laughlin rejected the task force's recommendation. And he claimed that their readmission prior to the completion of their suspension would not be, quote, beneficial to the total college community, end quote. He insisted that their suspensions were, quote, fair and prompt disciplinary measures, end quote, necessary for the college's well-being. And in Laughlin's words, this is how he phrases it in his response to this recommendations. He says, quote, anarchy, a state totally unacceptable to me, end quote, would ensue if he did not uphold the student suspension. Now, while a few of those 19 suspended students would eventually return, most did not. Some went on to receive degrees at other institutions, and Kris has kind of brought this to light for me, and for others, however, this was the end of their college career. And as some of our current students pointed out several weeks ago, the college has lauded nationally known figures like Martin Luther King Jr. or John Lewis for their acts of peaceful protest to advance racial equality. And in conclusion, if we take anything away from this session, I hope it's that we need to really only look no further than our own alumni, to look in our own backyard for folks who are deserving of our respect, our gratitude, and honor for their courage as they fought for racial equality here at Springfield College. And with that, I'm going to conclude my remarks and turn things over to our fellow panelist, Kris.
Cool, thanks, Ian, appreciate that. So, hey, everybody, Kris, as I said earlier, if you take a look through your screens right now, you can see a couple of those warriors from the 1970s and late 60s who did some building takeovers. If you look at John Dover, Linda Moffett, Teresa Bird, Janet Houston, and I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of, oh, Don Brown is there. You can just look through and see them on the screen, you know, give them a wave. But yeah, so I think with history, and like with history in general, we often look at history as like the past and only look at, well, obviously it's the past, but we look at it for just that it's the past. And I think with these events, it's important that we contextualize it and look at how, you know, it impacts today. And I think on a Springfield College campus, you know, navigating the school as a Black or brown person, especially if you're not an athlete, is really a lonely feeling. and it's hard to do. And, having people that you can lean on and talk to help you navigate your journey that have done it before you really helps a lot. So like, for example, someone like Carlton Pickron, who's in here, has helped me a lot, in navigating my journey through the college. And I remember, as I sat in Blake, I run track here. So as I sat in Blake, my freshman year, my sophomore year, my junior year, and I watched as we brought in people who, wore the jersey at Springfield, and they talked about how, their journey through the college and yada, yada, yada. I remember tapping my teammate and, kind of asking, like, have they ever brought in someone who was Black to do this? And, he said no. And it frustrated me, and it made me wonder, how am I supposed, if I'm struggling, who can I talk to? So, when Marty Dobrow sat me in his office one late November night, and told me about that he heard of a story of, student protests. And Marty's my podcast partner too, and my advisor, my professor, my friend. And he told me about, these takeovers. I was really interested because one, I just wanted to learn more about the topic, but two, I wanted to talk to these people to, ask them about their experience and how, if they had the same thoughts that I had, if they had the same struggles that I have. I really wanted to connect with these people. And what I saw as I was trying to do that is that it was very difficult to even find those people, to get in contact with any of those people. Even as I was writing my story, it wasn't until a few days before the deadline where I was even able to talk to a Black person. And the two people that I was able to talk to, one wasn't even in the building, and another was in the building but didn't really want to be there. So it wasn't exactly, the correct voice for the story. And that was tough for me. But, as thankfully earlier this year, I was able to meet Richard Griffin, who's also in here, I forgot to mention earlier. And he would, from our Legacy Alumni of Color meeting over in like March. And I remember I left my number and I said, reach out anytime. And he really did reach out anytime. He would call me, anytime and talk for multiple hours about anything. And he introduced me to Dr. Brown, and that kind of opened the floodgates to the entire Alumni of Color group, and which is now called the Legacy Alumni of Color group. And these alums met with students. They have been meeting since March, and just meeting multiple times to hear from us, to hear what we need. It's a group just of under about 30 of the alums, mostly from that time period, some who graduated from Springfield, others who didn't. And as I watched this group working throughout the summer and working with them, I always kind of like, I always wondered, why are you doing this? Like, if you were all treated so, you weren't treated right when you were here. Why do you want to give back to a place that didn't give you, anything? Like for John Dover, I'm looking at right now, didn't even get a degree. He had to go to another school. And then they told him he had to do 2 years or 3 years, and because his credits didn't transfer, and he said, how am I going to do this? But he finished. But I always wondered, and I think there's obviously many lessons you can learn from this. I think as I look at the Alumni of Color survey I have here, there was only 100 alums who replied to this, and 1% was from 1960 to 69. And that just shows you, and I'm sure that's for a multitude of reasons, but I'm sure some of that is because of how they were treated here. And I think that in turn, Alumni of Color relations will in turn result in students of color, student retention, student support, mentoring, in general, all the things that I talked about. But I think the biggest lesson that I think I want people to take away from this time period and these alums, the fact that they are now reinvested into the college, and for months over the summer, since March, this Legacy Alumni of Color group worked together to put a 11-page glossy document hand-delivered to the president with recommendations. They had committee chairs, and they met to give recommendations to the president. Gave recommendations to the president 51 years later. And I think the biggest lesson that I want people to take away is that, these people love the college. People who are criticizing, and I think this is a microcosm for the national conversation too, people who are criticizing American traditions, Springfield College traditions, things that we all love, marginalized people, Black and brown people, when they're telling you that something is wrong or it's unfair, and they're going about it in a certain way, you shouldn't, the question shouldn't be, your first reaction shouldn't be defensive, and you shouldn't be upset that they're doing this. You should be asking the question of why. And the fact that these alums, many of these alums didn't even graduate from the school, and they're meeting to help this school, because they are so invested in this college, in the mission. They fell in love with the Humanics philosophy, the spirit, mind, and body. And that for me is the most important part about this group, and the most unique thing. And one of the things I hope you take away from all this information is that, in protests, we see, rioting going on in protests like that. I think the first thing you need to do when you see people doing that is ask why, and really listen to what they're saying, and really take into account and be careful how you deal with that. Because I think even today, when students here made their demands, I don't want to look back at my college 51 years later the way these alums are looking back at their institution. And that's the biggest thing for my part of this presentation is. And I'll pass it over to Quinn or Aniley. Are you next?
I'll go next. Thanks, Kris. So my name is Aniley. I am a senior history major at Springfield College, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about my research that I did in History 201 with Ian regarding the 1969 to 71 protests. So my research was focused specifically on how and why people opposed the Black student demands and other liberal movements on campus. The goal for me and my research partner was to better understand why people disagreed with these movements and how that affected actions taken by the administration moving forward. Before I share my findings, I want to recognize that this is not the whole picture, but rather an image created using the documents and materials available in the archives and information. Oh, it's cutting in and out, of course. Can you guys hear me now?
It's like cutting in and out a little bit.
Oh, of course it is.
Good now.
We're good?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Where did I stop? Do you guys know where I cut off?
Probably start from the top.
Okay, so my name is Aniley. I'm a history major, and I was in Ian's 201 history class, focused specifically on the 1969 to 71 protests. My research question was formulated based on how and why people opposed the movements and how that affected the administration and the actions taken by the administration. So before I share my findings, I just want to recognize that this is not the whole picture. And if at any point you guys can't hear me, just let me know, wave at me or something, because I'm just going to keep going. Shutting off my camera. Okay. Can you guys hear me? Thumbs up, anybody? How about we let Quinn go and I'll try to figure out how I can get this.
That's a good idea, Aniley. Quinn, why don't you take over for now, and then we'll try to get Aniley back.
Yeah, I can go. So like Aniley, I was also in that History 201 class, and my group, we focused on a specific person. We focused on Larry Lebo. We were lucky enough to get the chance to interview with him twice. He had a lot to share, and he even shared with us some of his personal collections that he kept for himself. He donated some to the school's archives, but he kept some for himself, and he let us borrow it to look at for our paper. He was a student activist on campus and became like the bane of the administration. Like Kris said, and many other students, he was also attracted to Springfield College for its Humanics philosophy of spirit, mind, and body. However, he felt the school was falling a little short on its spirit portion of the philosophy when it came to student life, and decided he needed to become an active voice on campus. It was ultimately his attempt to hold the administration accountable that inspired his actions on campus. An anti-institutionalism sentiment grew within Larry upon hearing the complaints of Black student protesters on campus. He was outraged by the sentencing of those students, and it inspired him to try and make a change. One of the ways one of the first steps he took was he joined the student council. He was elected onto it, but he hoping to have some power there. Unfortunately, he was a little let down by the lack of power that he actually had on the student council. Disappointed by the lack of power he held as a member of the student council, Lebo, along with some others, formed a club called RUB, Resistance, Unity, and Brotherhood. Lebo and RUB wrote this sort of mini book called The Liberator. It was much bigger than a pamphlet, and it was a self-described disorientation manual designed primarily for freshmen and transfer students in an effort to give them a totally different view of Springfield College. This totally different view was meant to open incoming students' eyes of the issues that was going on the campus, and to like display the issues through something that wasn't the college handbook, because they weren't going to put it in the handbook. And so one of the things I found really fascinating in this disorientation manual was there was a quote from Dean Costello, like the head of the students, and it was a quote to Larry Lebo where he said, "Personally, I don't like you either." I thought this distinctly points out the inconsistency and the negative views of the administration towards the students at the time. Another way to voice his concern, Lebo wrote for the school paper and worked on a column called On the Left, where he highlighted the issues and flaws of the college and surrounding areas. During the winter trimester of 1970, Larry's role on campus reached a tipping point when he was ultimately dismissed after he published things he found written on school desks. Although he emphasized that it was not his own writing, he was still dismissed from the school, and President Wilbert Laughlin refused to mail out the newspapers because he didn't want it to be sent to alumni and trustees. Ultimately, Lebo's dismissal became an issue of the boundaries of the freedom of speech on campus, and Lebo's case gained a lot of local attention and eventually became an American Civil Liberties Union case. He was referred to as Free Speech Lebo, and he felt a lot of support from the other students on campus. Due to the highly publicized nature and the fact that they did violate his freedom of speech by dismissing him, he was reinstated. But Larry was dismissed again from the school, again in 1970 during the second administration building takeover. He helped organize this admin building takeover in 1970 in response to the unfair punishments placed on Black students that took place in the Massasoit Hall takeover. The intention behind it was to get the school to listen to and to structure their policies to include things from the list of Black student demands, which would better support the Black student body on campus. In response, Lebo and a group of other Springfield College students took over the admin building. This, like Professor Delahanty was saying, this list of demands that the Black students held it wasn't like just to Springfield. These were a common list and common complaints of Black students across the country. So when Springfield College passed over these demands, they weren't just ignoring Black students on this campus, they were ignoring the complaints of Black students nationally. The police were called, and Lebo and the other students were dragged out and put into police vans. They were arrested on charges of trespassing, spent the night in jail, and faced a $300 bail, which is a lot today. So in the 1970s, it was a whole lot. So the student council ultimately posted the bail for the students, but they now face the disciplinary process of the school, which Larry had already experienced and found really unconstitutional. The school's disciplinary process at the time didn't really work all that well on behalf of like the students. The dean of students, who was Dean Costello, who we already know doesn't like Larry Lebo, worked as prosecutor, judge, and jury. The students weren't really allowed to play any sort of role in the trial. So Lebo and the others who were arrested in the second takeover hired a lawyer who filed a restraining order on behalf of the students against the school to form an injunction. At the injunction hearing, the school's attorney argued that the students who entered the private institution do not get judicial due process. The judge turned the temporary restraining order into a permanent one and said the school had to come up with a way to afford for the students' rights to due process. So the college then formed a collegium to address the issues and complaints of like the judicial system on school, and came up with a new one. So Lebo and the fellow occupiers all argued that they should get like one disciplinary hearing since they all took part equally, but the school said no, and Lebo and it was two other students had a separate hearing, and they were to be tried differently. Ultimately, they were charged, and they were kind of given the understanding like if something like this were to happen again, they would be dismissed, but they were charged with this is a quote from the school, the destruction of the college, society, and Western social organization. So they were ultimately reinstated into the school. The 1960s and 70s was an era of social and cultural change that happened because students across the nation were willing to voice their opinion about things that needed to be changed. The country has never been a perfect place, and it's taken people like Larry Lebo to be willing to challenge the issues of society, whether that occurs at a national level or in specific communities or institutions like a college. In our society today, people continue to be treated unequally, and we can follow Lebo's example and his legacy to speak out and make change happen. And now I'll turn it back over to Aniley.
All right, can you guys hear me now? We're good? Oh, yay, claps for the phone. Okay, my name is Aniley Morales. I'm a history major at Springfield College. And again, my research topic was how and why people oppose the Black student demands and other liberal movements on campus. The goal for us was to better understand how and why students, faculty, and the Board of Trustees opposed these movements and how that affected the way the administration reacted going forward. Before I share my findings, I just want to recognize that this is not the whole picture, but rather an image created using documents and materials available in the archives and information given during oral histories with members of the community. While this does present a pretty good picture on how the administration and the Board of Trustees felt about the movement, there are aspects of the student opposition experienced by Black students at the time that is missing from this narrative. And I just think that it's important to highlight that we are missing pieces of the story. So we broke down the dissent into 3 parts: the Board of Trustees, the administration, particularly President Laughlin, and the students. The Board of Trustees, we primarily looked into board minutes and statements issued by the board surrounding the Black student demands. The Board of Trustees was a really powerful force in responding to the demands made. They issued statements supporting the actions by President Laughlin and were opposed to the Black student demands. In a memorandum in May of 1969, they endorsed Laughlin's refusal to sign the Black demands and his handling of the situation on campus. The memorandum was key evidence that really highlighted the opposition to these demands made by the Black students and illustrated the board's opposition to structural change at the college. The administration was also opposed to the Black student demands, and through a statement by President Laughlin, they were mainly opposed to the method of dissent. So as Kris was talking about, the way in which people were expressing these kind of issues that are happening on campus. Laughlin refused to sign the demands, but in his statement, he addressed them and said that he was willing to help alleviate tensions, just not through the methods in which the Black students had presented their concerns. Again, this document made it clear that the disagreement that the board and the administration had to these demands was about the method of dissent as opposed to the actual content, and it's important to highlight that because it did affect the ways, the actions that they took against these demands. The students, through articles, statements, and other documents, also echoed their sentiment. In a statement of concerns regarding the crisis at Springfield College, 900 students argued that how dissent was given was the issue instead of the content of the information itself. There was other blatant hostilities towards the demands, as you can see in the Italian-American demands, which was a parody document. If you looked at the 2 side by side, they're exactly same in format, structure, everything as to the Black student demands, but they blatantly disregarded the importance of the demands made by the Black students at the time. And there was also a part of the dissent was that students couldn't understand why there needed to be concessions made for Black students. They believed that they were a part of a community of inclusivity. And through that, they didn't think that there were any problems going on the campus. So when these issues came to light, it was really hard for them to understand why these issues were coming out. So all of the documentation and stuff showed that both the board, all 3, the Board of Trustees, the administration, and the students all disagreed with the format of the dissent and also believed in this community of inclusivity that was infallible to these kind of issues. So upon reflection of the 1969 demands, and as they've talked about, Kris and Ian mentioned that there has been a new set of student demands. I think that there are 2 really relevant lessons that to carry forward into this moment in the college's history. One is that the content of these demands should be the focal point of the change in actions created by the administration. I think that it's really important that we focus on the biopic community at Springfield College and their sentiments, their statements. Why are they making these claims? What can the school do to address these claims? Another point that I want to make is that the second lesson is the importance of systematic, institutionalized long-term change. We see another set of demands due to the failure of previous administrations' lack of creating long-standing institutionalized change that could make the experience for BIPOC students on Springfield College better. So I think that it's really important that these demands be taken seriously. It's not the time to put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. I know you guys have probably heard that a million times during all this, but I think it is really important that the college looks to make long-standing institutionalized change that can prevent this from happening another 50 years from now. Thank you for dealing with all of these really awful technical difficulties. I look forward to any questions or comments that you guys have.
So first, please just join me in thanking Kris, Aniley, and Quinn for some just really outstanding research. I mean, as a historian, I really couldn't be prouder right now, and you know, made all the more important by the subject matter. So I'm going to send out right now in the chat some links to our some specific collections in the college archives. This is just a part of the documentation that we have digitized, and I see Jeff kind of smiling at, you know, at his computer right there. There's a lot more that is still to be done to digitize this stuff, and we will be doing that as part of a larger sort of grant project that myself and Jeff are working on. But we want to encourage you all to explore the records, explore the you know, there's some wonderful photographs in there. There's some really, you know, heart-wrenching documents in there, and there's probably a lot more to come. And so I want to, you know, encourage you all to go in there, explore on your own, and, you know, be historians. You know, that's kind of my plea for everyone. But also, we hope that you have questions. We really hope that this has kind of spurred some, you know, points of interest and curiosity, and or just any comments or reflection you want to give too. So we would like to open it up for questions now.
May I say something?
Of course.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just a bit taken aback that it seemed to be the format of the Black students presenting our demands that was most upsetting. When I got to Springfield College as a freshman, the number of Black students, the Black freshmen, there were 12 of us. And there seemed to be an uproar because there were 12 of us, and we sat together in the cafeteria and we talked. And so it was, I think the displeasure started then, not when we got around to doing the demands, but I just, it was, in my point of view, it was based on isolation, where I made a decision to get done in 3 years because I just wasn't enjoying what I thought I would enjoy as a co-ed. So it kind of hit us all as 12 Black freshmen, from sitting together to hanging around together. And then in my case, when the flag burning occurred, when we were in the basement of International Hall, that I was through at that point.
Yeah, and I see some comments, and I want to first of all thank Ms. Burr for her perspective. And I see some comments in the chat asking if the other members of the Legacy Alumni of Color group are willing and you know, wanting to share. We would really welcome that. I think that's probably what everyone would benefit most from. So whomever would like to take the floor, we would really love to hear from you.
No, we can't hear you, Dr. Brown. Can't hear you for some reason. We try to take your headphones out of the phone, maybe. Nah, no good.
I'm so sorry that you can't.
We can hear you. We can hear you. We can hear you now.
You can hear me now.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my name is Donald Brown, and I'm an alum of Springfield, the class of '69 and the class of '78. And I'd simply like to begin by applauding the panelists. Doctor, I think you did a marvelous job in bringing much of this together. Kris, Aniley, and Quinn, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your yeoman work. And I remember Larry Lebo. I remember when he was a student. But over these years, I had forgotten the ally that he and so many others had become. We did have some allies, and they really need to be saluted. And I'm very happy that the panelists, for the most part, are white. I'm very, very happy about this because I think now more than ever, we need allies. We need allies on predominantly white campuses. We need allies in this society. We absolutely need you to continue doing what it is you are doing. Very much involved in the Legacy alumni of color and need to say a word about it. I had a thought about 3 or 4 months ago, and that thought was that so many of us so many Black alumni had not gotten together. Those of us who were involved in the building takeover in 1969 and others in 1970. We hadn't heard from each other in about 50 years. And so I thought it was time for us to come together and to appreciate and to love on each other, just to provide a word of encouragement. Well, we learned that there were things going on at Springfield 50 years later that required our attention. And so about 30 of us came together, some of whom did not get their degrees from Springfield, as was mentioned by Kris and I think someone else. Some didn't get their degrees. They went to other institutions. And there are a few that still do not have their degrees from any institution. We came together, and what we mentioned was the common denominator in our coming together is the mission of Springfield College, and that is spirit, mind, and body. It brought us all together. Yes, we do love Springfield College, and we've been spending time together making recommendations. We had a great meeting with the president, but much work needs to be done. So we're going to continue our championship for Black, Brown, and other students of color at Springfield College. And we look with eager anticipation to doing it. That you can count on. Before I leave this earth, I want Springfield College to become the college that God has called for it to be. And I'll do everything in my power in working along with my colleagues, now some of my dearest friends, in ensuring that there's a brighter day for current and future generations of students of color, and by extension, all students at Springfield College. Sorry that I've gone on a bit long, but I do it out of love for Kris and for the students of color at Springfield College and for my alma mater. So why don't I stop there?
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. Appreciate you.
You're quite welcome, quite welcome.
I know we had questions in the chat. Do any other alums want to talk? Mr. Griffin, Mr. Dover, Houston, any of y'all? Ms. Waters, Mrs. Moffitt, any of y'all? You're on mute, Mr. Dover.
John, unmute.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is John Dover, and I was in the class of 1971 and was separated from Springfield in 1970. I went on to Long Island University, where I received my degree and started my teaching career, which lasted about 44 years. Just sitting here and listening to the panelists really brought back some very vivid memories of Springfield College. I came to Springfield College from the McBurney School, which was in New York City, and part of the West Side YMCA. So I had already had an indoctrination of spirit, mind, and body before I got to Springfield, and really wanted to continue that type of education at the college. I remember both takeovers. I was a part of both of them. First one basically as a participant, and the second one as the president, along with Richard Griffin of the Massasoit takeover. And I think what I really valued the most was the camaraderie that I had with all of the other Black students, and their willingness to do whatever they could in order to make life better for Black students at the college. When we were separated after taking over Massasoit, and we were separated, we were in two houses off campus. And during that time period, maybe 3 or 4 days, maybe more than that, we spent that time doing research and writing, putting down a lot of our experiences on paper. And we did it as a group. And we broke things up, and different individuals took charge of different things, and they checked in and said, okay, this is where we are. And they asked the different groups and other people for information. So we didn't waste our time as we were waiting, I guess, to go on trial, which I found to be very interesting. So we spent a lot of time putting our actions on paper. And I found that to be a very exhilarating type of experience. I remember when the verdict came out, I thought it was very interesting how the college actually broke down the punishment for our building takeover, basically separating the juniors and then the sophomore, and then the freshman. I was taking a look at one of the documents that was there, and I was reading through it, and I said, wow, all of those folks were the class of 73. But it didn't mention, I couldn't see on there where it said anything about the class of 71 or 72. But it was interesting how they meted out that punishment. I guess they did it because several of the juniors were involved in the administration takeover. But again, to the panelists, I want to thank you guys for refreshing my memory on some of those details and some of the other things that I had heard about, but I wasn't totally clear on who was involved. Thank you. Job well done.
Well, I would like to thank Kris for bringing all of us together. I haven't seen John or Richard or Paulette or Janet for over 50 years. And this has been a wonderful experience, just learning how well everyone turned out, which is just a great thing, and bringing us together to be active for our alma mater for most of us. I'm excited, and you know, I live right near Springfield College, and I just drive by and walk by, and I don't really look in except to use the track a few times. But this has been a great experience, and I'm looking forward to offering more support to the college.
I wonder if I could say a word. I'm not sure who the moderator is or who I have to ask for permission. Maybe
Good.
Ian or Kris.
It's an open floor right now, Dr. Cooper, so please go right ahead.
So I have been fairly quiet this week and lots and lots of Zooms and had an opportunity to learn a lot and hear a lot. And I would just say that an institution is based on and built on the people that are there. And so if you want to leave this week with some optimism, we still have some more conversations tomorrow that are important that are on my schedule. You know, we are who we are. And so what we bring to the table and what decisions we make are based on all of us collectively believing in a place like Springfield College, a place that I really love and believe that it is unique and special, and it's based on the people that are here. Today's been a hard day, and I'll just say that as president and as a member of this community. I thought we would make it to November 20th and we didn't. And so collectively, you know, when I put my head on my pillow at night, I believe in this place because I believe in you.
Thanks, Dr. Cooper. And Ian, did you mind if I answer Cherie's question before we wrap it up?
No, not at all, Kris. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I guess I would say and thanks, Ms. Burr, for those comments, and Dr. Brown and Mr. Dover, all the alums. I appreciate you all so much, and everyone came today too. I would say for Sharice's question about participating in the activism and this project, for me, I would say that students should, to maintain the memory and I guess to make change happen, to just be right there with us. And I think it can't be, one of the things that we've learned, it can't just be, you know, like one person at the forefront of all of this. It has to be a bunch of people at the forefront of all of this. And that's why we kind of have that group of, you know, SSBD, MOE, SEA, the BSU, Women of Power, because we can't, we all have to be on the same page and we all have to move together, and we're not no one's better than another. And we all are capable of doing the same things. We've seen each other do it. You know, right before this, Kev and Raj had 260 people in their session. So, you know, we're all capable of leading things and doing great things. And I would just tell students to, you know, when you see President Cooper, tell her to keep going, keep doing what she's doing, and you know, listen to what we're saying. You know, just have the same message unified with us, so, you know, just support what we're doing so we can make it happen.
I think that'd be a really, you know, beautiful note to end on. It's 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, and snowing outside, and we've got a lot of work ahead on the weekend, I'm sure, for folks that want to attend more sessions. So I really want to thank everyone who attended. Thank especially the folks from the Legacy Alumni of Color group, and thank especially my fellow panelists, Quinn, Aniley, and Kris. This was really special, and you all did really incredible work for this. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Great job, Ian. Great job, students.
Oh, please attend the SGA Diversity and Inclusion Fair. Starts at 6. I just sent the link in the chat. I apologize for late.
And please fill out the evaluations. Evaluations are helpful. Thank you.
The website is also updated with the link for tonight's inclusion fair.